Ideas change the world, and AI is accelerating the transformation of humanity's future in profound ways. And it is opening up new frontiers. It is vital to bring forward the best of human intelligence to shape the creation of artificial intelligence. If humanity is going to solve its greatest challenges, we need AI, and we need an open discussion on ethics, transparency, possibilities, technology, challenges, and opportunities. This program brings together the brightest minds from around the world, not just for the future, but these digital pioneers share actionable steps for right now.
Today's digital pioneer is Sridhar Sudarsan, Chief Technology Officer of SparkCognition. With over 2 decades of technology leadership experience, Sudarsan has been at the helm of several complex products and projects, collaborating with global customers on cutting-edge technologies. Previously, Sudarsan was the Chief Technology Officer of IBM Watson Platform and Partnerships, where he led the technology strategy and architecture of the IBM Watson Platform. Sudarsan is widely recognized as an expert of the business potential and application of advanced technologies. He provides leadership on AI solutions and patterns for clients, partners, academics, and research and development teams. He holds over 14 patents in the areas of AI and distributed computing, has published white papers and articles for a variety of outlets, and has been a featured speaker at conferences and universities. As a Chief Technology Officer, he's been responsible for driving SparkCognition's products and technology strategy, leveraging next-generation artificial intelligence system to secure and optimize assets across key industries. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me here.
So we're excited to hear more about your story and your views on the latest advances in AI technology in various industries that you've been actively engaged for the last 20 years as one of the true AI leaders. With all of this said, I will give my words to Angelica, who will open up this dialogue and tell us more about you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Angelina. So SparkCognition builds AI technology for industrial applications, revolutionizing the way that industries like oil, gas, defense, utilities, aviation, and financial services manage those critical functions as efficiently and safely as possible. Now, in an economy full of uncertainty and risk, data is really your most valuable asset. And on today's episode, we're going to get to the bottom of advances in AI technology infrastructure, the pressing subject of national security, cognitive AI solutions that can be operationalized, the revolution and reinvention of national security through the emphasis on social impact, and the making of Society 5.0. On the Gen Z front of things, which I'm representing, we'll explore the implications of the surveillance generation on national cybersecurity frameworks, the consequences of social impact on these strategies, the current state of AI ethics implementations in the workplace, and the Gen Z approach to ethics and transparency, as well as, of course, your recommendations and advice to the next generation of digital pioneers. With this in mind, Mark, I pass it on to you to lead with the first question.
Thank you very much. First of all, Sridhar, it's a great privilege and pleasure to have you with us. We need to benefit from all the insights and brains like yourself around the world, especially in difficulties that we're experiencing now with this current pandemic. I want to start this with a question to you. You have been with IBM for over 20 years, and you have learned a significant amount in developing Watson at IBM. How did the IBM Watson role prepare you for significant challenges and opportunities at SparkCognition?
First of all, thank you, Mark, for having me here. It is a privilege to be here as well and share some of my thoughts and have a good discussion with you today. IBM, in the 20 years that I've spent with IBM, I've done a lot of different. I've played a lot of different roles. I've had many different technologies and complex problems, industries that I worked in, including the last 10 years that I spent with the Watson team, and I would say that the thing that I took away the most that I have done is work there as an intrapreneur. And what that has allowed me to do is, over the last 2 decades, being able to find areas of opportunities and grow them to a scale that only companies like IBM can do. And I'm very grateful to the opportunities that I got with IBM to do that. The fantastic colleagues. IBM has been at the forefront of innovation for over 100 years, pioneered some of the latest, some of the most commonly used technologies even to this day, whether it's ATM transactions, relational databases, even AI.
Yes.
With the first, in the first half of this decade, the previous decade that we were in, IBM was one of the first companies that actually started this entire journey and made AI cooler again with the research effort that we did, the Grand Challenge with Jeopardy. So what I've learned is how to break technological barriers and boundaries and find new areas of challenges as the society is moving forward, as enterprises are moving forward, as customers are moving forward and changing the way the entire ecosystem plays and how we reinvent ourselves. So that's been, to me, the greatest learning in terms of how do you innovate at scale, how do you innovate with a little bit of chaos, and how do you grow at scale. And being able to do that over and over has certainly taught me a lot of lessons.
Thank you very much, Sridhar, for this response. I know IBM has been revolutionary and pioneering in a lot of the work in cognitive and AI, and you and your company right now, you are continuing to define and revolutionize strategies, digital strategies around disruptive technologies, including AI, including Internet of Things, and including cloud computing. Maybe you could share how this is being done and how you are redefining and reinventing the space.
Yeah, and so SparkCognition started with a mission to drive efficiency within physical assets and use AI technologies, use cloud computing, use cybersecurity as ways to prevent infrastructure from going down through either physical, electrical, electronic issues or cybersecurity related issues. And then when it is up, how do you run it at its most optimum ways? So that's been our core mission. We've been applying these techniques. We've done a significant amount of invention in the space. And because we were kind of born in this era, in this decade, in this previous decade, 7 years ago, through our founder Amir Hussain.
Yes.
It has been a fantastic journey as we've applied the same kind of principles from a data and an AI perspective, and to very, very complex problems, whether they involve large equipment, very expensive $120+ million combustion turbines that power a lot of power plants and large machineries, or whether we talk about engines, whether we talk about oil and gas platforms. That's been our core focus, and we've constantly pushed the boundaries of where we apply innovation, how we take some of the latest techniques in the space of AI that is constantly evolving, and how do we build these products to help our clients in their journeys. Honestly, I think it's these large customers that we have who are transforming the world, the partners and our customers, and we're happy that we can play a role in enabling that transformation.
You've been present in the European market as well. So what is your take on Europe's current potential to deliver on AI? I'm curious to hear what does EU needs to focus on, in your opinion, in order to compete and to catch up with other emerging markets when it comes to the digital transformation.
And I think it's a very interesting question, Angelina. And the way that I view this, there are a lot of market dynamics, there are a lot of geographic dynamics, there's always a lot of political dynamics and social dynamics and economic dynamics that we're dealing with that are constantly changing on a day-to-day basis. And I think, to me, the use of AI technologies and the use of technologies, digital transformation technologies, for each of these economies, and if you take the EU as an entirety, it's the ability to adapt rapidly to understand what your own local, and when I say local in this case, it's the EU local nuances are, and even within the EU to understand both the disparities as well as the similarities that exist within that sort of local environment, and being able to then adapt to these nuances and use the technologies that I think is the most important piece. And I think AI can allow us to both use that, as well as AI is a way that it allows you to transform into. So AI is more of a means to driving towards the objectives that you're going after. I think EU has been, for centuries, it has been pursuing a successful history of technology, innovation, ingenuity, vested in core European values. And being able to and then being able to project them in the international stage. So being able to drive that with a vision for both current and future sustainable economic growth and societal well-being is really important. And I think that's the core objectives that it's pursuing. And to me, there is no other way of doing that besides relying on data. And the fact that you have to rely on data means you need to do something with the data. And the data can be generated from a variety of different areas, whether it is from industries, from academia, whether it's research, whether it is from social media, which is an increasingly growing platform, already has a large footprint and just continues to grow on as information is getting democratized, and being able to harvest that to generate the right kinds of insights, and then avoid the misgivings of incorrect information or misuse of information are all the core values that I think EU is continuing to drive and needs to drive more of. So investment in AI, I think by continuing to increase the investment in AI, I believe EU does stand to combine the industrial strengths as well as the technological strengths, and a growingly high quality of digital infrastructure and a regulatory framework. So it's a combination of multiple of these things that need to come together, and then apply that to the fundamental values. And to me, that's what is going to drive EU to continue to play in the world stage and become a leader as well in the innovation area, in the data and in the data economy, if you will, right? And I think that's probably the way that I would think about it. So driving these sort of both top down, bottoms up, driving these through policies, through the right investments, and through addressing the variances as well as the similarities that exist.
Thank you very much, Sridhar. So I want to go back and continue the discussion. You mentioned data. Well, data is data, but you need to gather specific predictive information out of it. And I would like for you, if you can, share with our audience on how SparkCognition, under your leadership, is deploying AI, predictive analytics, to improve reliability, reduce carbon footprint in your operations.
Yeah, and so SparkCognition has multiple ways as we take our core products, which are the foundation of how we take our solutions to market. And the way that we look at the world is through the lens of data. So whether it's time series and sensor-based data, or whether it is structured data, whether it's unstructured data, or cybersecurity related threat data, those are the lenses that we look at the universe. And when we work with our partners in the oil and gas company, in the aviation company, in the automotive industry, power generation industry, it is about trying to use the equipments, these systems of systems, these fleets of systems that they're running,
yes,
and find ways to use machine learning and AI techniques to apply innovative approaches to augment physics-based approaches, which has been used for decades, to predict the behaviors of these assets, the behaviors of systems of assets, and provide the right kinds of intervention, advisory intervention to the field technicians to take actions. So as one example, when we work on offshore platforms, we're working on finding ways to predict multiple days in advance, over 10 to 14 days in advance, of the possibility of an event. And these are called PIEs, or production impact events. And how do you essentially now, by our customers then taking proactive actions to prevent these impacts, it's not only an economic impact, but it also could be a carbon footprint impact, right? Because you're reducing the amount of equipment and the fixing and the maintenance schedules needed. You're also potentially, I mean, we're talking about offshore platforms, so any impact event could potentially not only have an economic impact, but it could also have an environmental impact. So being able to predict these events certainly provide that. In our journey, in many of our customer journeys, and tying back to the European customers, certainly led in large parts by some of the largest European customers, but also closely followed by many of the global customers, US-based as well as other continents-based. Many of the oil and gas companies are embarking on this journey of transforming themselves to become energy companies. And BP, who is one of our partners and a client where we've done one of the largest deployments of AI in oil and gas, in the oil and gas industry, is leading the way in terms of transforming themselves when they recently announced their ambition to become a carbon neutral company by 2050, as well as to transform themselves to becoming an energy company. And what that means is some radical decisions that, bold choices that the leaders of these companies are making, which is reducing, oil production by almost 40%, which is the core part of how they consume, of their business, if you will, today. But when they do that, they want to spend, an increasing amount, multiple billions of dollars in the renewable space. And if anybody can drive that kind of transformation within the sustainability space, it is these largest energy companies that are potentially centuries old. And they have the breadth, they have the expertise, they have the distribution, the supply chain to be able to do that. And we are playing our part in that, as we believe very strongly that in order for all of these players to go through that transformation, the digital transformation is a core part of that journey. And that is where we believe we can, as SparkCognition, we can truly help these companies to do that.
Thank you for this thoughtful answer, Sridhar. You mentioned the key words there. You mentioned also sustainability, that energy companies are transforming, and the transformation is very rapid, it's very digital, but yet they are keeping all of the sustainability factors, including reduction of the carbon footprint. So continuing with the world of energy, how can AI-based technologies, specifically the ones that your group is designing, help industry players in the energy markets you just mentioned, but also in national security, to defend remote critical infrastructure from escalating cyber attacks? And you and I spoke about this, Sridhar, multiple times. Hacking and cyber attacks are now coming from state and stateless actors. We need a better, more sophisticated AI-driven approach, and I'm interested in your thoughts.
Absolutely, and I think you're right, is the side effect of the growing footprint of the digital transformation that companies, academia, small and large governments, state and national entities are going through, is the fact that the number of connected devices, the number of areas, the surface area of where compute and data infrastructure is going to be available, both data in motion and data at rest, is going to grow exponentially. It already is, and it's just it is only going to grow even more so. And the way that and an unfortunate reality is that bad actors are a core part of the system. They have always been as long as humanity has been around, and I think that just continues to play on. So you're absolutely right in the fact that being able to protect infrastructure is not just a a checkbox for a company to do. Infrastructure is not just laptops and desktops and servers anymore. It is also the critical assets. It's your pipelines. It is your control systems that are running in your power plants. It is your HMIs, your human machine interfaces. It's your SCADA systems. It's all of these different pieces of infrastructure that need to be protected. Not only that, I think given the current pandemic situation, there's this term that we use called the plant to couch, which is managing people now because of lockdowns and restrictions on the number of people and social distancing guidelines that are now being practiced more as a norm around the world. There's this sort of unexpected ways of how plants are being monitored and managed from people's living rooms, from their couches. And when you do that, erstwhile security measures that mandated people to be inside a plant and run within certain security firewalls and protocols now need to be rethought. So you're transcending IT networks into OT networks, into IT networks, and so on and so forth, which again increases the attack surface even more so. So the only way that I believe, so cybersecurity needs to be thought about in radically different ways now. And in the same vein as we're all practicing different ways of working, we need to think about security in very different ways as well. So as part of that, one of the, we have been, as I mentioned in the beginning, our mission is very critical. We've been very central to taking an AI-focused approach to cybersecurity as well. And there are many players in the cybersecurity space, and for a long time, signature-based approaches, heuristics-based approaches have been around. Yes. But when we started out, we actually took a very data-centric approach to cybersecurity, where we focused on what we call zero-day malware, which is, can I detect malware that I've never seen before? And how do I protect myself against that? And that's what our core strength is, and we truly believed that the only way you could do that is by applying machine learning and AI-based techniques that cannot just classify what is and isn't a malware based on what has been seen before, but is based on what are the characteristics of those threats, and how can you sort of stay ahead of the people that are potentially taking a WannaCry and making small edits to it and then are masking it as a different malware that can bypass some of the security walls that are built in. And so Deep Armor, which is our cybersecurity offering, truly works on that. And then most recently, we actually launched an industrial version of that, which is specifically designed for the OT networks, which is in places like power plants, and launched a partnership with Siemens. So another way for, again, a 700-year-old company coming together with a 7-year-old company that is us, and finding ways, and Siemens bringing their expertise in manufacturing and deploying and servicing these assets in these industrial environments in power plants for decades, combining that with our AI strengths and our cybersecurity strengths, and we're together we're bringing this to market. So we believe that we're certainly taking long strides in this space, and we're starting with the energy space, but it will transcend into logistics, supply chain, and manufacturing as well from a cybersecurity perspective.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sridhar, for these responses. Now, taking it from a more Gen Z perspective, Generation Z, which is my generation, is known as the surveillance generation. And that's because we grew up with IoT capabilities. We were born into the internet and social media era, biometrics. We're literally surrounded by screens 24/7 since we were infants. And we seem to be a little bit too comfortable with sharing our information online, perhaps. So what do you think? Are we a little bit too comfortable with sharing our personal data? And what implications does this have for our cybersecurity frameworks? I pass it on to you.
It's a very good point that you make there. It's absolutely true. It's very interesting. I was reading a statistic that over 55% of the Gen Z cannot go more than 4 hours without being connected, without an internet connectivity. While for the baby boomers, they can go over a quarter of them can go for a week or more without the connectivity. So you're absolutely right about the fact that you're surrounded by the Gen Z, which is actually quite similar to the millennials in terms of the way that the population is truly interconnected with the digital world, right? And as you correctly mentioned, most of the life of the Gen Z population is online. And one of the things, though, is while the Gen Z freely give out and are open to giving out and sharing personal information online, but they also are probably the strongest in terms of the voice that asks and demands that that information be protected. So let's not be fooled by the fact that these digital natives, while they crave instant gratification, right? And the average attention span for a Gen Z member is about 8 seconds, according to data that some of the survey reports. And as digital natives, while they crave instant gratification, sometimes at the cost of sharing the personal data, and without much consideration for longer term consequences or questioning about the downstream impacts of the data usage and so on, let's not be fooled by the fact that they're not reckless with their personal data. They are not gullible. They're not susceptible to data theft and cybersecurity fraud, at least from a standpoint of how they think about the world, how they think about the universe. The metaphorical antenna that we see in people when you're threatened by activity that is not normal activity, I think comes very naturally in the data world for the Gen Z than it comes for any generation before that, prior to that. So the fact that the Gen Z is certainly very open to sharing personal information and are very okay with sharing their personal information a lot more than generations prior to that, I think does come with a sense of awareness that has been inculcated at the exact same time. So what does that mean? That means that the corporations, companies need to be playing a much bigger role in terms of building in on that trust and protecting that trust to be able to reinforce it and not break that trust, because that's the responsibility now that falls on the larger companies. So it's very interesting. In closing, I'll just say that on the one hand, while the Gen Z they distrust corporations, but they also communicate with them as if they're family. And if you look at how social media communications are today versus a formal letter that would have been written, protesting against a certain principle or talking about a customer service issue that somebody has, in the past, that was a very formal set of processes. Today, it's almost like you would go and talk to somebody in your family, and that's how that's the paradigm shift in the communication that has occurred. which I think is being largely driven by the Generation Z.
Excellent. And you just mentioned corporations, and I want to ask this question here before I pass it on to Angelina for her approach. Gen Z is the most social impact driven generation yet, it's known. And according to Ripple Match, very interesting statistic, a whopping 94%, so almost 100% of Gen Z respondents to a Cone Communication survey said they believe companies should help address the critical social issues. So social impact should be a driving force of corporate policies, etc. What do you think are the consequences of this knowledge on enterprise governments and policymaking? I'm curious to hear your perspective, and then we'll pass it on to Angelina.
You're absolutely right. We are at a juncture today in 2020 where the Gen Z has actually started entering the workforce, and they will shortly make up for almost a quarter of the global working population. So while they're similar to millennials, they do come with generationally unique values, unique attitudes, unique concerns. And I think you're absolutely right about the fact that social and environmental concerns are top of mind. Gen Z, a very large percentage of the Gen Z consider themselves to be socially conscious. Over half of them cite a brand's social consciousness as a key influencing factor in their purchasing decisions. And they know that we all know that the Gen Z actually drives a whopping percentage in terms of the purchasing power that they run, right? They're a very large purchasing power. So by that, what I mean is that they do not form an opinion of a company just based on the product quality or sales numbers or price, but they're also very equally interested in the ethics, the practices, and the social impact that the companies and the corporations are driving. So as a result, within the corporations, CSR, corporate social responsibility, is a key management practice. It's a fast-growing management practice where companies are prioritizing things like sustainability, accountability, philanthropic efforts as key elements of first-class business models that they're thinking about. And while the quality of the goods, while the pricing, the services that you provide for a company is still very, very important and is central, but the company's ethics are, I think, in today's world, way more important than they've ever been. And I think that's just going to continue to grow. In terms of being able to demonstrate commitments to a broader set of challenges like sustainability, like climate change, like hunger, poverty, etc. Not only must the company have strong ethics, but they also need to demonstrate actions that are being consistent with their values. And these do become front and center for companies as part of their branding. So that changes sort of how the company messages themselves, what their corporate practices are, how they actually conduct their business, how they build their products, how they develop their products. All of these are a chain set of impacts that companies and corporations need to go through. And so I think the part that as the Gen Z continues to become the largest consumers and the largest drivers, people that are growing in the driver's seat for the companies, for policies that are being made, I think these social issues become, corporate, social, ethical issues become a key and a central part, more so than it has ever been before. And I think that's where it is very important. So for example, if you're a company that is working on or transforming your supply chain, finding a way to build an ethical supply chain is very important for your Gen Z customers as well. Finding ways to be local yet global is another way of looking at impact, from source to consumption, source to mouth for food products, source to clothes for attires and retail wear. They're all very, very important. So if you look at companies like Patagonia, they do put CSR, corporate social responsibilities, at the forefront of their business practices. But more and more companies are definitely in their journey, somewhere in their journey of taking action in that same mindset. IKEA is another great example. They're on a mission to become 100% circular, which is turning waste into functional products. And they have a foundation that works with communities in crises and provide water, provide electricity. So that is an example of corporate social responsibility from IKEA that actually fits with their audience, which is typically the Gen Z folks that are buying from value-based brands.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting to hear more about the social responsibility from the corporate point of view, but I wanted to touch upon the government side as well. So as you mentioned earlier on, the European Commission put forward the European approach to the AI, which is, apart from focusing on the obvious socioeconomic aspect, vastly relies on the ethical framework as well. So I'm curious to hear what's your take on the current progress level that AI has come to in terms of developing the ethical aspect and inclusiveness of the AI, and on a global scale, and having in mind that you have more than 20 years of AI leadership in this area. So what are your takes on this?
Yeah, and as we talked earlier, the EU is continuing to pursue a digital strategy that is building on its core foundations, and I think the idea that where they are in that journey, I think, is continuously evolving, because the journey, there are only milestones, right? There's no end. It is a journey, as we, in the true sense of it, where the destination just continues to keep extending further as you go along. So in the global scale, as countries and as EU as a whole is looking at the future of sustainable economic growth, societal well-being, they're continuing to find ways of harvesting and using and creating more data to be able to constantly course correct in that journey that they're in. And also the fact that there are more and more investments that are continuously growing. AI system, an AI ecosystem, for example, one thing that would help is for EU to think about taking a driver's seat in building and developing an AI ecosystem, and an ecosystem of ecosystems that brings the benefits of the technology, it brings the benefits of the innovations, the benefits of the scale through the whole of the European society and the economy. So for citizens to reap new benefits through things like improved healthcare, safer, cleaner transportation systems, better public utility services and public services in general. If you think about for business development components in the ecosystem, new generation of products where and services where Europe is particularly strong in, and Europe has been continued to be leading in the spaces of machinery and spaces of transportation, farming, green economy, circular economy, healthcare. I mean, all of these, and then also at the other end of the spectrum, high value added sectors like fashion, like retail, and tourism. So all of these are different ways of driving more and more awareness, and being able to drive a large impact to all the different pillars in the ecosystem, all the different players within the ecosystem. And another example is AI and digital technologies are a key enabler for the Green Deal, which is the EU's new growth strategy to become the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050. So being able to increase energy efficiency and being able to track when and where electricity is needed the most, reducing the wastage, finding ways to do smart heating, being able to save millions of tons of oil and fuel, for farmers to be able to use fewer pesticides and fertilizers. Why? All thanks to the data, thanks to AI, and the insights where you're not trying to over-engineer a solution and trying to build for a particular level, and not realizing that you're potentially over-engineering solutions to do that. So being able to do all of these kinds of digital innovations and drive this in the core ecosystem, I think are all the steps that are in the right direction for EU to continue their journey and to be thinking through as well as needed.
Gen Z is a very ethics and transparency driven generation, and something interesting that I want to get from your perspective is what role do enterprises have in educating employees about ethical AI principles? And on the same note, isn't it unethical to not have all of your employees versed in basic AI protocols if AI really is what governs their work environment? I'm curious to hear your perspective about this.
It's a very interesting way you frame that question. So first of all, there are multiple parts there. The first part of it, is it important to educate all employees about the ethics of AI? 100% yes. It is not just employees, but it's also consumers of, you and I as consumers of products and of services. As we talked about in the Gen Z discussions earlier, there's a growing need for all of us when we consume a product to not just wear a shirt or eat a piece of food item that we get off the shelves, but we are increasingly growing curious and interested in understanding the journey that piece of product or the service that we're using comes from. And as part of that, I think, as we mentioned earlier, because data and AI is playing a critical role in that entire life cycle for these products and services, we absolutely need to be transparent about the ethics. AI is not necessarily a black box as it in some cases has thought to be. For the right set of folks, whether it's data scientists, whether it's corporate governance folks, whether it is policymakers, whether it's business experts, whether it is domain experts, everyone has a role to play in determining what constitutes the core elements that drive the principles of the AI techniques and the technologies that are being applied to drive an entire business process. So as part of that, you're absolutely right. We, within a corporation, it is critical that people in different roles truly understand not just what constitutes ethical AI and what does not, but also participate actively in that debate, because this is not a one and done definition. I think as we continue to find more ways of using AI and technology within these enterprises, within solving a lot of these complex problems, that is going to continue to evolve. The debate will continue to grow. I think we will all, as a society, learn. And as I had mentioned earlier, the beauty of the AI systems and why I believe AI systems are actually immune to a lot of that is, by definition, one of the core characteristics of an AI system is learning and applying learnability within the operations way quicker than any other technology in the past has had. So whether it is, manual systems, rules-based systems, programmatic systems that have all evolved over the last several decades to centuries, the fastest turnaround that we can get from learning, if we do make mistakes, we as the global world make mistakes, I think if anything, AI allows us to correct those mistakes and rectify those mistakes very, very quickly. So hence the notion of adaptability, hence the notion and the need for driving the change and the extensibility in terms of these systems. And I truly think that AI allows that. And education is a very, very critical part of that. Education in terms of the core principles, in terms of the technologies, and the roles that each one of us are playing in enabling these technologies as well as consuming these technologies.
The way I think about AI and variety of techniques underneath, it is really more as a way of thinking, a way of building, a way of understanding how to solve complex problems. Can you please expand to our audience on the quote that you delivered, I think, months ago, which was very powerful, I thought.
Yeah, and I think it is the way that I think about AI. I mean, certainly there's the technology aspects of AI, which are what are the innovations, whether it's in the NLP space and computer vision, in audio, video processing, in terms of scalability to handle large data sets, streaming, encryption, cybersecurity, machine learning, deep learning, all kinds of techniques and technologies. So that's sort of the technology aspect of AI, which is what we generally tend to think about most of the times when we say AI. And when I think about AI and the use of AI in all of these large, complex problems that we've been discussing, in all walks of life, to me, it goes beyond the technology. The technology is the start, and it is the trigger. It is the fact that hardware has grown in terms of our ability to process faster. Our compute ability is growing. Our ability to store information is growing. Our ability to generate information is growing, and process information is growing. I think while that is very, very important and the core building block, to me, it goes beyond that. Some of the things we were talking about earlier in terms of the ethics, how are models being built? What is the ways that you do model governance? When you talk about physical systems, how do you have physics-based equations work with machine learning-based techniques, and how do they complement one another? When you talk about remaining useful life of assets, when you talk about services being provided on these assets by very large companies, when you talk about social media information, it is all of us are, as consumers, as providers of data, we're playing sort of our own role in some way or form. It is in terms of how we, as data scientists, as the people that are building these models, as architects of these complex systems, as people that are deploying, delivering, and companies like SparkCognition, as we're sort of developing these large systems and enabling our customers and our partners in this journey. I think, to me, that's what I mean by it's a complete 360-degree view where each one of us is playing a role in that ecosystem in a different way. Every day when we wake up, you're a parent, you're a spouse, you're a child, you're an employee, you're a manager, you're a leader, you're a driver of innovation, you're a performer. So it does not matter what walk of life you're in and what role we play throughout the day. I think we each have a way to contribute to this data and AI economy, if you will. And I think that is how I truly believe that we all need to find a way to develop our own mindset, evolve our own thinking, and find out the roles that we play, evolve the roles that we play, and really see how we can find the new normal, if you will, in terms of how we do work and how we build things.
Thank you very much. So my next question is real world experiences that maybe you could offer to our audience on, and now especially you discussed this in Washington, D.C., of how policymakers could implement AI practically and across all industries. What could they do? I know they speak about AI, discuss it at the United States Congress, meetings at the White House, but what could be done from a practical level, especially the policymakers?
Yeah, and I think it's a fascinating question, and there are probably two broad ways I think that policymakers can think about AI in the practical sense. One is in using AI techniques and technologies to think about how to even shape the making of policies and to define these policies. And I think one of the side effects, again, of the digital transformation over the last 25, 40 years, if you will, that we're all going through, and we're still at the early stages, at the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, of that era, I think is the fact that the gap between innovation and scale is shortening. It's narrowing with every passing year. And while companies would take potentially decades to grow into, a large sort of scale, if you look at companies like Amazon and Apple, Microsoft, some of these sort of, either past trillion or $2 trillion in the case of Apple as of yesterday, or multiple $1 trillion. We're talking about, in the grand scheme of things, all of this happening within a span of less than 25 years, and that's a quarter of a century. And what that really is entailing is the way that we think about, again, this entire ecosystem of how each of us are playing a role is rapidly evolving. So policy making generally tends to lag innovation, generally tends to follow innovation, is probably a better way of saying it. And while in the past centuries and decades, we've had the luxury of time to craft the policies because scale takes time, so you almost do it in parallel. I think that equation is shifting now. So in ways of defining policy, can we use AI is probably one very practical ways of looking at it, whether it is looking at way things are being consumed, processes are being defined, business processes are being crafted, corporate governance policies are being set up, the use of data, the use of ethics, all of these different things. The only way to consume and craft a policy for that is really through the use of AI. And the second thing is about what are some of these guardrails that we want to provide so we don't stifle innovation, but we provide the right kind of guardrails that I believe will continue to shift over time for the use of AI. Because what we considered as the use of AI technologies and techniques even 10 years ago or 5 years ago or even 1 year ago are very different when we think about what it's going to look like over the next 2 years, over the next 5 years. Whether it is things we see within with the shift in the drivability of vehicles and the shift into more carbon-friendly vehicles, and sort of how that is completely shifting how we think about things, how supply chains are, how companies run things. Or it is from a consumer perspective, how you're controlling devices within your home. We talk about intelligent homes, whether it's thermostats, whether it is your devices in your own home. I think all of that is continuously shifting. So being able to create the right kinds of guidelines are very, very important. So even if you think about the current pandemic situation that we're in, it has prompted an even further acceleration than we all have been used to in the past. Even if it is, think of normal scientific processes are being compressed. If you look at the pace at which various entities around the world are working on whether it's vaccine research or trials and bringing these to market, we're reducing decades to years to months to weeks to days very, very rapidly. So for policymakers, staying on top of all of these things is very important, and not being stuck in a place that was sort of a definition that was based on, let's say, even 2015 principles and guidelines, and while you're thinking about policies for 2025, probably does not set the right tone. So I think that's very, very important in my view, in terms of using AI for policymaking as well as policymaking for the use of AI.
Thank you very much, Sridhar. I want to, before going to Angelina, I want to go to Angelica. She has some situation that she needs to address. She has a question to ask, and then Angelina and I will finalize with a few other questions, and then we'll finalize this program. So Angelica, to you, please.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So essentially, my wrap-up question for you, Sridhar, is, as a digital leader, what recommendations do you have for Gen Z to succeed in the digital future? It would be wonderful to hear it from your take as an executive, as a very experienced individual in the digital realm. What advice do you have for the younger generation to succeed in the future?
So, if for the younger generation, as you're coming into the workplace, as you're continuing to establish your own set of innovations, your own set of guidelines, one thing that I would say is, be bold, right? Do not be afraid to take bold decisions. Do not be afraid to follow a path that you truly believe in. There will be a lot of roadblocks, but there's always a way to overcome them. And I think, as we had said earlier, technology and this world of technology is very natural to the Gen Z and the our younger community. So they're the only ones who can leapfrog us from where we are today into the next era, where that is the normal course, the new normal that we are all living in. And how we think about interactions between systems and humans, and humans and humans, and systems, is where I believe the true next 20, 50 years are going to be. And I think you're all going to be driving that future. So I would say, think bold.
Excellent.
Thank you very much
for insights.
Thank you. I know, Sridhar, you have a couple of minutes. Angelica, thank you. I know you have to probably get off the stage and focus on something else. So we thank you for opportunity to get the Gen Z questions. I know in a couple of minutes that we have with you, Sridhar, I wanted to ask you on the questions related to being a commissioner at the United States Council of National Commission. What does it mean for you, and what does it mean for the vision of the U.S. innovation and competitiveness?
It's truly an honor. I think the work that our co-chairs in the National Commission of Innovation are leading to really think about what holds for the future of innovation, and where does the United States and sort of how does the United States play a role in this space? What is it that we need to do in a collaborative way with the right partners to drive the scale up? To me, that is really a core driver of that effort that was kicked off last year. I think some of the work that Deborah and her team are doing is just phenomenal. It is an example of a bold way of thinking. I think we certainly have a great esteemed set of leaders in that community, represented by academia, national labs, corporates, small and large corporates. It's a very humbling organization to be a part. It is very humbling to be a part of that organization, and an honor. And I truly hope that I can continue to contribute to the efforts there, and really bringing some of the conversations, Mark, that you and I have been having in terms of driving AI into that whole mindset and the thinking, as we think about what innovation in the next 50 years is going to look for.
Yeah, thank you very much. The final thought that I want to leave our audience, Sridhar, is you have stated that no matter what you are doing on the digital transformation journey, there's always a place to start, and now is the time. That's the action call from you, Sridhar. So what happens if we don't undertake a digital journey at a speed and velocity that is required to now? What are the consequences? And what will this future look like?
Well, I truly believe that we already are, as we've seen, this entire current generation that is really going to drive the future of the world within a few short years are being born in this data digitization era. And as for companies, as for corporations, for policymakers, for countries, states, the only time to start, if you haven't, is now, and really there is no alternative. It's the only entities that will be around in the future are the ones that embrace this change that adapts to their own values, their own corporate principles, or their own ethics and guidelines that they're driving. But that to me is how the future of the world is going to look like. So I don't think there is an alternative to that. I think the only ones that will be there on the other side will be the ones that have embraced this journey.
Thank you very much, Sridhar. I'm passing it on now to my colleague Angelina for closure. We thank you very much for being on this.
Excellent, Sridhar. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great pleasure to have you here today as one of the true digital pioneers. Throughout the lens of artificial intelligence, today's dialogue truly brought up to the light the importance of national security, how the future generations will shape it, what policies and initiatives government are currently pursuing, as well as critical national security recommendations that nations around the world must consider in order to remain resilient in the digital age. So I wanted to thank you one more time for this great opportunity to have you here.